to really live by the theme of our Indaba, is to stamp out the stigma. And throughout the day, I will be sharing with you pointers on what to do. But the first one is you have to know your facts. It's imperative for all of us to really know what epilepsy is and what it is not. And the more we know, the better it is for us to educate ourselves and educate the people around us and be able to share whatever information that we have gathered so that we eventually all contribute to stamping out the stigma that unfortunately epilepsy does come with. Our first speaker for today is a very, very, very dear friend of mine. I would like to do a bio on my own, but the risk is that we might run until 7 o'clock because of all the good things that I personally have to share about it. But just allow me to go through the bio that has been prepared by her team, and I hope you don't find any surprises in what we have written on your behalf. So please bear with me. Charlene Castle has spent 26 years working in different areas, the areas of education, human resource, as well as the non-profit sector. Epilepsy South Africa was established in 1967, and it's the only national organization in South Africa offering specialized and comprehensive services to persons with and affected by epilepsy. Our aim is to enhance and improve the quality of life of our target. The organization comprises of national offices and 6 regional branches. Is a person of epilepsy herself, and she's a national director living with epilepsy. During her career, she has founded and headed up educational institutions ranging from pre-primary, primary, and even a large private tertiary institution here in South Africa. She has founded and grown schools and has been instrumental in growing small businesses throughout South Africa. Charlene has extensive leadership experience in her career. She has thirst for knowledge and has loved all of her studies. A passion of hers is making a difference and being of service to all people she meets. She's a long life learner, a lifelong learner. Charlene is a distinguished Toastmaster, a very large achievement within the Toastmasters International Organization. It's actually the highest accolade given to a member of Toastmasters when it comes to leadership and public speaking. She has advanced communication skills and leadership roles that she served in an organization like Toastmasters. But overall, Charlene is deeply passionate and focused on sharing information and providing support to all persons living with or not with epilepsy. So ladies and gentlemen, please let us give a big, when I say a big round of applause, it's like as if you got your tax rebates earlier than expected. Or whatever you paid for the e-tolls will be paid back to you tomorrow morning. So please give a big round of applause to Charlene Castle.
So, thank you, Mark.
You're welcome.
Sitting, I'm like, whoa, it's not easy to hear somebody talk about you, right? And I don't talk about those things really easily. So I'd like to first of all welcome each and every one of you to 2023 National Epilepsy South Africa's Indaba. And true to Dr. was stepping on the stage and Mark mentioning it, this year's international theme is Stamp Out Stigma. Now, Epilepsy South Africa, as you heard from Mark, has been around for many, many, many years. And one of the reasons that we have a theme of this magnitude this year is because we've come to realize as a community, a global community of people that we are in service to, that stigma is a really, really, really tough topic and something that every person living with epilepsy experiences at some stage of their lives. Now, Epilepsy South Africa is a chapter of the International Bureau of Epilepsy, which is our umbrella global organization. And there are 22 chapters in Africa. So we are proud to be a chapter of the International Bureau of Epilepsy. And I think what is so interesting for me is when I saw this theme, is I was like, stigma. And one of the branch directors said, are we talking about myths? Are we talking about stigmas? How do we define this? And really it's a topic that yields so much conversation and such multifaceted approaches. And often, I must tell you, as a person living with epilepsy, it's harder living with the stigma associated with it, epilepsy itself. Because people automatically judge. People automatically make assumptions. And I never thought for 1 minute I would be National Director of Epilepsy South Africa. It wasn't on my career path. It wasn't in my line of sight. And then Gauteng branch, quite a number of years ago, phoned me and said, would you do a keynote speech at our National Epilepsy Week, the same as this week? There I went off to the branch with my eyes on stores. And we have our branch director, Eileen, today with us. With us today as well. And my eyes were wide open because I stood at that branch and I walked through it and saw all the residents. And I realized that we are the voice for people that don't have voices. And people with epilepsy do not speak out. And I can tell you, it's only in the last number of years that I started speaking about my epilepsy. And today, I want to say something that you're really all going to enjoy. When somebody says to you, so do you know somebody that has epilepsy or do you have epilepsy? Yeah, it's my cousin. That's fabulous. Do they want to be involved in Epilepsy South Africa? I didn't tell Master of Ceremonies for today. And he kind of looked at me and was like, I beg your pardon. You see, it's an invisible disability. And today we're here to stamp out all those things that we don't know about epilepsy from an amazing team of speakers. And things that we need to know because each person that's in the room today and the many online with us today and the many that will see our recordings online on social media in the weeks to come need to know these critical facts, need to understand them, and that you leave here today and you share one fact with one person that you know, do not realize the difference you're going to make in the world today. And I say that from the bottom of my heart, because I'm only blessed in the last number of years to have what you call auras, that I know when a big seizure is coming. And I can say to who's with me, just, I'm going to make myself safe, I'm going to put something under my head, and please just sit with me because I'm going and get help. And off I go. My favorite neurologist in the world, Dr. Rowji, is here to speak to you today. How many times has he received me at Milpark Hospital? Last year it was airlifted with a helicopter. And I'm grateful to be standing in front of you today as a national director, and I stand in honor of you, in honor of my mother and my father and my family that have walked through this path to have me here today. So it's with humbleness that I open the Indaba today. It's with humbleness to say thank you to every single one of you for allowing me to have a voice, for keeping me alive. Dr. Pradeep, Dr. Rowji, my parents, my partner, my brother, my sisters, and even my 23-year-old that last year to sit next to me, asking me, Mom, stay with us. Mom, stay with us. And keep talking. So today's a privilege and honor. And I'm going to hand you back to our MC because I have an upset you later on, and I don't want to take too much time. But Mark Batwale is also a close friend, as he mentioned. He's got accolades as long as can be. he has done master of ceremonies roles for many functions and Toastmasters contests and all sorts of things on the stage alongside me, for me, part of it. I've been honored to see him in front of really large audiences. So when we phoned him, I said, Mark, I need you on the 15th of February. And he was like, okay. And I think he went home to Samantha and was like, Charlene's phoned me for this. And then Mark found out his cousin's got epilepsy. And that came out yesterday. So there's not one person, by show of hands, that doesn't know somebody with epilepsy. Put your hands up if you don't know somebody with epilepsy. Everybody knows somebody, right? Past or present. So it affects everybody. I'd like to hand you over to Mark, who's now getting a wide microphone. I don't like microphones, and I think he doesn't either. And Mark, I've got so much to say about you. You've done so much training in the HR space with me. IT specialists in certain fields, and it's an honor to have you with us. And thank you, Mark, for giving us your time.
Thank you, Charlene. I should have recorded what you said and played it every morning as I wake up. But I guess we just have to live with what we get. I said earlier that I will be sharing some pointers on what we can do as a community or as a group to stamp out the stigma. The first one that I shared was know your facts. The second one is be aware of your attitude. Let it be that you do have epilepsy or that you know someone around it. Just be aware of your attitude. Remain positive and watch your words. The words that you use have power, and just be nice to the people around you. It can be difficult for people on the other side when we think they are on the other side. Our next speaker is Dr. Pradeep. Dr. Pradeep works for the group, Netcare Hospital, sorry about that. And if I was a neurologist, you would know I was a neurologist. I will tell everyone I was a neurologist. But Dr. Pradeep, with his deep knowledge, is humble enough to come and share with us and guide us into the things we do not know and the things that we might have doubts about. There will be a Q&A session at the end, so do not panic if there is something that you might not have understood. You might write it in your book, and then we will take it to the doctor. You can ask me, but it will be at your own risk. So management is not responsible for the knowledge that I will share with you. So ladies and gentlemen, I would like you to please give him a big round of applause as the doctor comes to share with us what he's learned over many years, and he will give it to us freely. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Pradeep.
Thank you for the honor. Thank you for the first to speak here, Charlotte. Thank you to all the people here, and thank you to the host, which is Epilepsy South Africa. So I'm just going to run through some important facts. I'm not going to make too much of a story about it. If there's any questions, please feel free to stop me. I don't mind stopping and explaining myself. Sometimes the technical jargon gets in the way of people understanding what I'm trying to get across. So let's start off by talking about epilepsy. We talk about the epidemiology, not too much information, the causes and types of epilepsy. So moving on to the facts about epilepsy, the most important thing to remember, it's a non-communicable chronic illness. And that we have this concept that some people believe it can be contracted from another person that may or may not have it. And it's absolutely false. So there's going to be lots of myths that we're going to debunk as we go along. This data that I'm presenting is quite old. So this number that I'm quoting here is from the World Health Organization data saying that there's 50 million people worldwide that have epilepsy, which is absolutely a good number, but it's actually more like 60+ million people as we just turn the tide of the population. Oops. sorry, technical glitch. The most important thing, particularly in South Africa, we live in the low to middle income group around the globe. 80% of our patients in the world live in this area. So we make up a fair segment of our world population that has epilepsy. Biggest problem is getting treatment, and we see this every day. And I've seen this when I worked at Barra, and now I'm working in private. We see it every single day. Unless you have some benefactor who's going to bring you to a private setting, you're not going to get the treatment that you require. Even in our state sector, we get lots of patients going to facilities where there aren't neurologists, and that's a serious part of the way we are. We also know that patients with epilepsy succumb to premature death, which is unfortunate, because they're not getting the medication and they're not adequately controlled. And there's lots of discrimination. And we're here to distinguish the facts, and most importantly, stem out that discrimination based on neurological facts. So in terms of global prevalence, we don't really have data in South Africa, but according to where we stand, we're somewhere between India and China in that vicinity. So we're looking at prevalence per million of about 6 to 10 per million patients with epilepsy. We have a population of 60 million, even that we're not exactly sure about. So we're looking at large numbers of patients with epilepsy in our country. And as you see, as the world data reflects, that the numbers actually reduce once you get to more developed nations, where the issues that we face as healthcare practitioners is diminished, like child injuries from mothers not getting access to basic care around the time they give birth to their children, or infectious diseases, which can also affect the child. I'll skip this one, too much information. And the number that we're now talking about is that we, in terms of you as a patient suffering, or the people in the audience or outside, are part of a 65 million population that actually suffers with epilepsy. So you are one of 65 million people. This is American data. They quote a number of 1 in every 26 people. So it being more than 40, there should be one amongst us. Clearly, we're not talking about us as a group, but if you look at society at large, about 65 million people around the world. Most important point is that epilepsy can affect any age group. It's not restricted to a particular age group. Obviously, there are areas where there's a bit more representation, but we'll come to that shortly. And most importantly, is the most common chronic neurological condition that we see, whether in private or in the state sector, or in the globe. It is the commonest neurological disorder. Whether in this language or any other language, this is the time of year we should be all talking about. And most importantly, St. Valentine was actually a patron saint of epilepsy. So just passed Valentine's Day yesterday. And here we are celebrating the Indaba with the clear note that we want to stamp out the stigma associated with epilepsy. This is a little quote by one of our sufferers. Doesn't own your life. You're in control. Most important. The disease does not control. So going back on a historical perspective, this bloke, Hippocrates, who gave us our Hippocratic oath, started off by first describing about epilepsy, but there's been lots of references to epilepsy in the historical data, and that goes back to even Hippocrates. So 400 before Christ, but there were data that comes from even before that, 4,500 years before that, in the Vedic literature, the Islamic literature later after Christ. But there's also proof that we were trying to treat neurological disorders. And this is a phenomenon called trepanation, where they used to drill little holes into people's skulls. And we obviously have data from the Egyptian mummies, where they made holes, and people would go to war, knock one another on the heads, get a subdural, gets epilepsy, and the physician would go in on the opposite side to the hemiplegia because they realized that probably where the problem was, and they trepanate and they remove blood, and they would actually sometimes help with treatment of this patient. So historically, there's lots and lots of information regarding different modalities of treatment that dates back long before our imagination. So don't forget that we've been treating this for many, many years. We only start seeing medication coming about in the 1700s, and the first pharmacological agents being used, bromide, and really a toxic drug. I was also saying in my training days that one night with Venus would mean a lifetime on Mercury. And that was when you develop some form of infectious diseases like syphilis, and then you spend your life being treated with mercury, because that was one of the other drugs that we used to treat these infectious diseases. And then really, beginning of last century, early parts of last century, we started using drugs that were less toxic and only kill you long before the disease would kill you. The first of those agents was actually phenobarbital. In 1924, we started using electroencephalography, which is like the cardiac echogram for patients with epilepsy. And the last 8 years has brought us to where we are today. So just another quote from one of our patients: "I'm fighting epilepsy, what are you doing?" So epilepsy types. I'm going to break this up into different age groups, because I think that's probably the best way to describe and talk about epilepsy and the various presentations of epilepsy. This is the international classification of epilepsy, described into two big groups: partial epilepsy, where the person gets a feeling that something's about to happen. Some of us in this audience might have it. We might get a motor phenomenon, or we may get no particular phenomenon, and then the people around us see that there's some alteration in our level of consciousness, called complex partial seizures, and those that go on to secondary generalization. And then we got the main other group, which is generalized epilepsy. And there the presentations can be a variety of symptoms. We'll come back to that shortly. What do we mean by these things? As it's put into this diagram, if the area that stimulates this electrical abnormality is in one segment of the brain, if it's the right hemisphere, the left arm may start doing some funny things, or you get a sensation in the left hemisphere, on the left side of the body. That we would regard as a focal onset of epilepsy. And then you get the generalized epilepsy. There's no warning at all. The person collapses, has a seizure in front of you. That we call generalized epilepsy. Generalized epilepsy can be a variety of types. Sometimes you just have a sudden jerk, which we call a myoclonic jerk, or they can have sudden collapsing with atonia, toning their muscles and as a result collapse to the ground, or they go on to the generalized seizure that we started with a tonic phase where we go into muscle spasm, the body stiffens up. Chronic phase where they jerk, and it's a rhythmical jerk that they develop, and then followed by a paroxysmal state. So there's a difference between a seizure and epilepsy. I just want to make this clarification right now. So if you have a head injury, like by falling off your chair while you're taking pictures, you bump your head and you have a little bit of concussion, you can have a seizure. If your blood sugar drops, you can have a seizure. If you play rugby and go into a tackle, you can have a seizure. That's the seizure, and it lasts for that moment when it happens. So it's related to the mechanical or the metabolic or whatever other injury is happening to the brain. At that point, the symptom is a seizure. However, if you get seizures when there is no precipitant, or there's no initiating factor, or there's no aggravating factor, and they recur, so repetitive, unprovoked seizures are what we call epilepsy. I think we must make sure that we understand the difference. It's vital to understand that difference. So if a person has been drinking too much alcohol and they suddenly withdraw, they will have a seizure. That withdrawal phase can bring about seizures. If they stop drinking, they'll stop having seizures. So just remember there's a big difference, okay? And there's lots of causes for seizures: brain trauma, tumors, injuries at birth, metabolic diseases that you pick up from the genetics that you have no control over, infections of the brain, high fever, some people get high fever, seizure, Achilles, poisonings, etc. So as I mentioned, there's a big difference between the two, and we shouldn't confuse the two. So I was talking about the various time phases of one's life. So we have seizures that develop soon after birth. And these are generally regarded as indicative of some form of genetic disorder that may have inherited from the parents. And the genetic abnormalities usually follow a Mendelian pattern and a chromosome divided. And as we're sitting right now, they're probably discovering another gene that is responsible for some of those early onset epilepsies. And it's usually a combination of symptoms and signs that gives rise to our syndromic classification of these epilepsies that happen early on in the setting of the early infancy. And as I said, you can get abnormalities of different types of tissues that could be giving rise to that. The classic example is a movie, I don't know if you've watched, it's called Lorenzo's One, where there's a deficiency of a particular enzyme, and you end up with large quantifications or large deposits of very long-chain fatty acids in the brain, and that can irritate the brain, giving rise to seizures. And this young kid, Lorenzo, his parents discovered that it might be something that they were feeding him, worked out a strategy, and actually got around to actually solving part of his problem. Yesterday or today, I think it was in the news, where a family in the UK were able to diagnose metachromatic leukodystrophy in their older daughter. Later, the last child who was born a year ago was able to be treated with this one-off drug, and they are now officially cured of the disease called metachromatic leukodystrophy, which can also manifest with seizures. And we get different types of epilepsies. We get the benign types, and then you get the more dangerous type where the injury not just affects and gives rise to seizures, but they also affect mental functioning. And those are what we call malignant types. And you get lots and lots of different types of malignant epilepsies. And we call those the epileptic encephalopathies. That means the brain function is being affected, not just manifesting with a symptom of epilepsy. So don't forget the benign types, they might just have a seizure, but the mental processing and the ability to walk, talk, socialize, and be part of society is normal. We have the more hazardous type, which we call malignant types, which actually affect the child in many different forms. And these are, as I mentioned, a bunch of names that I don't want to talk to you about, but the common ones I talk about is Rest syndrome, Lennox-Gastaut, etc. And you get the benign types. So don't forget, there's a whole variety of types. It's not just one sort of type of illness that happens in children or in early childhood phase. Then you get the childhood onset epilepsies. Again, benign and the more dangerous types. So the severe types we see are the ones that are associated with mitochondrial abnormalities. Give them all sorts of names, Otoharas, Merv, Williams, all sorts of funny names for people that develop these kind of generalized and that develop these epilepsies in the childhood. We'll move on, and then epilepsies that happen later on in adulthood. Here we still again use the same classification, partial versus generalized. And here we would use EEGs as we do in children to determine where the epileptic activity is coming from, and that's how we actually classify it. But you can also get it on the history when you talk to the patient or the family members. The classic example of complex partial epilepsy is when you get patients who have developed a strange focal onset, then they develop a bunch of other symptoms, which we call automatism, so they lip smack. They move their hands all the time. Classically comes from the medial temporal lobe. And the temporal lobe has got many functions, but in particular it is a center for olfaction when we smell. And these patients always describe a funny smell, like going into the bathroom and smelling a doctor's practice, or walking into the kitchen and smelling something very offensive. So the olfactory hallucination is very common. That's where the olfactive function is in the brain. And they have this funny steering, like they blank for a few seconds. Very different to the absence epilepsy, but very similar as well. Oftentimes mistaken. And we get different types of epilepsies developing from different parts of the brain. We have many components of the brain. We have frontal lobe, and particular frontal lobe type epilepsies, parietal lobe with parietal lobe epilepsies, occipital, and so we have each of these can give rise to complex partial symptoms as well. Then we come to the generalized group, and here we have activity coming from the center of the brain. We think the thalamus and reticular formation around the thalamus, and they result in sudden onset drops with a whole variety of subtypes. And it makes a difference what age group we look at. We still have either focal or generalized epilepsy, or focal that becomes generalized, and then sometimes we can't figure out where they're coming from. We then put it into a syndrome. We decide based on that what we're going to use as a medication. We scan the patient, look at the EEG, and then we make a decision of where in this whole paradigm this child or the adult fits into, and then we choose our drugs accordingly. Just some important facts. So that's all the science. Some very important facts. In children specifically, some children do not manifest with typical seizures. I'll talk to you about that so shortly. A fair number of patients, as I mentioned, have the malignant type and can have intellectual disability. And sometimes it affects just a segment of the brain and will have specific learning disabilities associated with the area that is being. The common types of seizure disorders are usually focal epilepsies rather than generalized. But there are some patients that develop non-epileptic syndromes. And these we'll talk about shortly as well. I'll just give you a quick overview of non-epileptic syndromes as well. As we know, there's lots and lots of issues associated with epilepsy, especially in childhood. And oftentimes behavioral changes that happen with these children. If you have a seizure, you get stigmatized. There's another one of our issues. So we get lots of behavioral changes. Sometimes children can manifest with hyperactivity as part of the epilepsy syndrome. So don't forget that. You see these hyperactive kids, we take them off to a pediatrician, use everything. Might not be the only diagnosis to be made. As I mentioned, behavioral changes, cognitive changes, schooling difficulties, school attendance, all these factors will play a role. And these are the issues that we need to educate our population about and ensure that our children have access to the best education possible. So what we see, the person sitting in front of us, or we see the patient when the family brings it to us. But there are a whole bunch of other things that are still underground, under the surface that nobody even realizes, or if we don't raise them with the family, we don't know about. And as I mentioned, the stigma associated with epilepsy is a major problem. What to do when you see a patient with epilepsy? There's many things that's in your booklets today. But there's things you shouldn't do. Don't jump on them and try to force them from having the seizure. That's the worst thing you can do, because when your muscles are contracted, you break bones. And that has happened many a time. When you dislocate a shoulder joint or hip joint, you break a bone. There's a large bones and large muscles that are being activated. You can actually cause damage to the spine. Don't stick your finger into the person's tongue. It's not going to swallow their tongue. They'll bite their tongue, but they're not going to bite it in mouth. Most importantly, as the seizures happen, do not, whatever you do, jump on them, do anything to intervene with the tongue. As the seizures breaking, most importantly, keep your cool, protect the heads. Most importantly, protect the head, wherever they are. If they're in a dangerous zone, move them away from the danger zone. If they're close to water, fire, etc., move them away. And then as the seizures come to an end, the chronic phase is slowly ending, turn them onto the side, left or right. And the reason for that is there's a huge buildup of saliva in their throats. Shifting them onto either left or right side, as they take their first breath, because they stop breathing while they're having a seizure. As they take that first breath, that saliva doesn't end up in their lungs. Because that's the greatest risk after seizures, they will develop aspiration pneumonia, with the content of their mouth or their gut ends up in their lungs. So there's many phases to the epilepsy, and it all depends on the type of epilepsy. You can or cannot, you may not have a prodrome or an aura, and you may then go through the various stages. And remember that the post-ictal state can also include, besides confusion, some patients actually manifest with psychosis, aggressive behavior. People start calling in all sorts of terms. This person is what. It's not really that, it's actually part of the epilepsy. You get epilepsy associated psychosis, And you can get that immediately after the seizure, or you can get it months after the seizure. We call inter-echo psychosis. So just be wary. These things can happen. Thank you very much. Then we get the mimics and the chameleons of epilepsy. So not everything we see that falls or break dances is epilepsy. So we get syncope, which is a drop in blood pressure in elderly patients when we find can manifest and look exactly like a seizure. Breath holding spells in childhood. Child wants that toy, then holds his breath and boom, has a seizure in front of the whole public. Mother's embarrassed, seen it before, and then walks away. Migraine can manifest as an epileptic phenomenon. And a variety of other phenomena in sleep can also manifest with a seizure-like manifestation. And then we get psychological states where the person may use a seizure as a means to gain access to love or to political concept or to certain things. We call them psychological non-epileptic seizures. Unfortunately, it's not good to be putting people into that category. Sometimes epileptics develop these kind of seizures as well, because under severe stress for whatever reason and can manifest with a pseudo seizure. But oftentimes, and it's seen often enough that these things usually occur in epileptic patients to begin with, so we don't put them in a separate entity. And in childhood, in the neonatal phase, you can get jitteriness, sleep myoclonus, breath holding spells, as I spoke to you before, infantile tremor syndrome, so a whole variety of other things that looks like seizures but are not seizures. So those are the mimics. Not everything is epileptic that does not involve epilepsy to me. Then sleep in epilepsy. We do know that sleep has many different elements to it. So we got the REM sleep where you're dreaming and going through all sorts of funny electrical activity in the brain. Then you go through deep phases of sleep, and you got multiple cycles of sleep. The amazing thing is epilepsy is like a surfer. It's waiting for that perfect wave. When we do EEGs, we're looking at waveforms. And specific epilepsies like specific waveforms. So they will come out in particular phases of sleep. And we oftentimes see that. Or sometimes the epilepsy prevents it from being sleep because you can feel that the seizure. So one feeds off the other. So you can have sleep disorders in epilepsy that are separate. And you can have certain epilepsies that only come out in particular phases of sleep. So sleep is a vital component of one's normal neural function and can actually assist epilepsy and manifest with seizures only in sleep. And there's some epilepsies that specifically like coming out in sleep, especially temporal epilepsy and some of the idiopathic generalized epilepsies. As you wake up, kaboom, they get micro injects. As they wake up, they have a micro injection. Sorry, Ross. And most importantly, some seizures actually disrupt the normal regulation cycle of sleep. In terms of epilepsy management, you would then, as I mentioned to you, make a decision once you've assessed the patient, done all sorts of testing. Thank you. So when we make a decision about epilepsy, we then choose a medication according to the type of epilepsy and what we know works well. There's usually first-line drugs, second-line drugs, and third-line drugs. Not everybody adapts to drugs adequately. And we have lots of complications from medications, and we will choose according to the epilepsy type. And I've just given you a kind of footstool of where medications may or may not fit according to a seizure type. There's also some patients that really do badly, and there's some patients that do very well. And we know that there are certain good outcomes, and particularly if you just have a single seizure, short duration, very infrequent, whatever drug you choose sometimes actually works. And then you get those others that are much more complicated, and they tend to become more refractory. So no matter how many drugs you put on the patient, they just don't get control of their seizures. In that case, we don't get too worried. We have many, many different options. We call these medically refractory seizures, and so we try different things. There's been in the past lots of things that we've used. We've got a thing called vagal nerve stimulator. It's supposed to suppress epileptic activity by stimulating the vagal nerve. The vagal nerve is the nerve that goes to the whole body because of the grade 1 nerve. And by stimulating that, it sometimes obliterates seizure activity in the brain. The next thing that we've done is done epilepsy surgery for those epilepsies we can find a source. So what we do is we map the brain and we map where the seizure activity is coming from. And we then send them to a surgeon who then can do microsurgery to remove or ablate that particular type of epilepsy from happening. And we have great success in epilepsy surgery, but it entails a lot of monitoring and a lot of many things that happen in the lab. And I refer a lot of my patients to Cape Town to James Butler. I don't know if any of you in the crowd has been to see him, but that's where I generally tend to do when I send my patients. And you get different types of epileptic sources. When you see these patients, we can get them with neural developmental tumors, we get them with atrophy of the certain segment of the brain, dysplasias of the brain, vascular malformations that can give us. And so all sorts of things can be used to treat those underlying diseases or conditions, and then we can do surgery for them and actually get them back without adding more medication to them. And we've also used other forms of surgery. We've taken away two hemispheres, cut right down the middle between the two hemispheres, called it opus callosotomy. We can do a whole hemispherectomy in patients that develop severe epilepsies in childhood from autoimmune disease. We've also tried deep brain stimulation in some patients, but most importantly, we do focal surgery for focal onset seizures. As I mentioned, there's different types of surgeries that we can do. We can do anterior temporal lobectomy, mesial temporal lobectomy, neocortical resections, hemispherectomies, and corpus callosotomies. So just the last bit of information is that there are 40 different types of seizures. So there's not one, even though we try to make them into 2 big groups, just so we can get a handle on that, and many different types of epilepsy. So don't forget that. And not all the patients manifest with the usual symptoms. It is the most common disease, as I mentioned, more common than cerebral palsy, muscular dystrophy, MS, cystic fibrosis, and all sorts of other things that cause death. And most importantly, do not allow or have anybody make you feel ashamed for having epilepsy. Here's some interesting people that have had epilepsy that we know. John T. Rhodes, we all love and absolutely adore. Those politicians in the room. Lenin, not John Lennon, but the one from Russia, the Russian Revolution. Bonaparte and Elton John, I didn't know that. And then Danny Glover, which we all always know about. Just remember, the saying goes, I am not disabled, I'm just differently able. That's really the bottom line when it comes to epilepsy. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Doctor.
Questions?
So with the traumatic brain injury, does the
Patients
traumatic
with
brain injury patient result of medical?
the last bit, what was the last bit? Traumatic brain injury leading on to
Develops epilepsy too?
yes,
Of
yes.
genetic or not? And what is the depending on?
What's it depending on?
Yeah.
So as you know, trauma and traumatic brain injuries, there's a whole variety of things, right? So you can have a closed-head injury versus an open injury, right? So if you've got a gunshot, there's a big difference between that versus bumping your head against the wall. A vehicle where you can actually have a crush injury. So the ones, when we look at head injury, we talk about head injury with loss of consciousness. So when there's loss of consciousness, it means there's neurological injury. If the head injury is associated with hemiplegia, torn blood vessels, and is hemorrhaging into the brain, very likely that they will have seizures. And we always, in that particular setting, will start with anti-epileptics. They should be treated with anti-epileptics. Do you continue those anti-epileptics long term? My My philosophy is very simple. If you have a scar on your brain, you have a nidus for epilepsy, yes, you should do an anti-epileptics. However, you get the closed-head injuries where you don't see much. But at the microscopic level, you got little hemorrhages and tears in your neural tissue. Yes, they may not need epilepsy medication, but then we watch and wait for those patients who have seizures. So it's not a hard and fast rule that you use anti-epileptics. And most importantly, the short answer to what you're asking is there are different types of head injuries or traumatic brain injuries, which obviously need some thought before we start throwing medicines at you.
The second question I have on that is, can a specific person also know when the seizure is coming?
So generally, yes, because it's a focal onset, right? It's where the injury was. You would actually, if the injury is specific to a particular part of the brain, you will get an aura before that happens. I must say, you're very with it, and you're yawning the whole way through. I thought I was going to get swallowed, and yet you were asking 5 more questions. Right? You took in everything I was saying. Yes, so yeah, it's something that you have to think about. But there's no hard and fast rule with any of these things. Yeah, the lady with the blue. You, the lady.
I have my sister. She had a traumatic brain injury, which has resulted in a form of epilepsy called drop attacks.
Yes.
So she's on a series of polyeptic medications, and she's now having to wear a helmet to kind of protect her head from these unexpected falls. My question is, it's a very sore point in her life. It's a huge stigma for her because when she goes to the shop, she has to bring out the only thing that we can find in South Africa is a sucking pump. And for her, it's a breaking. Do you know of anything in South Africa or anything with regards to the protection of her head for drop attacks to protect her?
I think that we've always had patients just with those kind of devices on their heads. South Africa and those sorts of conditions are very limited in our ability to actually provide adequate head protection. And cycling helmet is probably the safest and most affordable, I would imagine.
Well, that's very good. Neurologist has suggested a cycling helmet, but for her,
it's an embarrassment. So there's another one. It's a stigma every day. We see that.
what is the causal relationship between epilepsy and ADHD?
So there isn't a causal in some patients. In the vast majority, there isn't a causal relationship, but there are certain epilepsies, like the temporal epilepsies, which oftentimes get mistaken as ADHD, and they treat it as such because they're actually having atypical absences, or in the absence epilepsy, they can actually be taken not paying attention, and then they suddenly get the burst of energy and they run around. So it's not always the case. And all patients with ADHD, young or old, should actually have an investigation like an EEG to exclude epilepsy as a basis for their ADHD. Also, the whole story about ADHD, what is the value for ADHD in the brain? We use stimulants for something, it's almost paradoxical. We use a stimulant for a child who's hyperactive. Seems odd, right?
Yes.
We're giving them something to help them jump around, but they're already jumping around. So the relationship, there is a relationship. We believe that some patients with epilepsy will manifest as ADHD, but it's not the vast majority. ADHD is a separate illness, and we obviously need to exclude epilepsy in those patients.
For somebody who has diagnosed with epilepsy and they are medicated, but they still have the occasional collapse and etc. Once they come around, should you be taking them into without?
Sure. So the question was, after a person's had a seizure, should they be taken to hospital, and that they're still having seizures despite being on treatment. So it's a two-part question, and I'm going to answer this two-part question. The first part is that if a person is having seizures on current modern-day anti-epileptics, not the phenobarbital and toxic stuff we used to do, and they're still having seizures, it means they're actually refractory, which means they're not adequately treated. So first and foremost, ideally, the role of anti-epileptics is to get you to seizure freedom. And 70% of the patients should be seizure free. If they're still having seizures, it means they are refractory. So that should not be the case, number one. Number two, should you then take them to hospital after they've recovered from the seizure? Not necessarily. But some patients have a phenomenon called status epilepticus. Now, how do you know you're in status epilepticus? It's very easy if you're having generalized seizures and you don't wake up between the seizures. So if you don't wake up for 30 minutes between the seizures, we call that status epilepticus. That's dangerous. So a normal seizure doesn't cause brain damage. But when you go into status epilepticus, you stop breathing every time. And when you do that, you get hypoxic injury to the brain. And you get neural damage to the underlying area that is stimulating the seizures. That's very, very dangerous. So if they don't wake up between seizures, that's one clear indication to take them to hospital. If they wake up and they're functioning like normal, there's definitely no indication to bring them to hospital. But if there's been an injury, of course, bring them to hospital. And most importantly, in terms of that period after the seizure, they can have a whole bunch of behavioral changes. And that shouldn't be a concern because that is sometimes a natural phenomenon after the seizure. Yeah.
Boys, I just want to find out, in my line of work, I'm an occupational therapist, but where I'm working, we do a lot of reintegration of persons with chronic medical conditions or disabilities back to work. And we do a lot of functional capacity assessments. Now, my biggest issue with persons living with epilepsy is that literature and everything that's out there is mostly focusing on the safety issues when we're talking about return to work, which is quite important. But from my experience, the biggest barriers when we're looking at epilepsy in terms of returning to work is the chronic cognitive issues, which would be your attention, memory, decision-making, and so on and so forth. And in some instances, depending on the onset of the epilepsy itself, is the associated motor or movement disorders, especially for people who have had epilepsy since they were young. And for me, it almost is, there is not so much literature that guides us to say, if we want to make a recommendation on alternative placements, these cognitive declines, will they get better with medication? Are they chronic? Are they associated with epilepsy or the movement disorders? Should I be placing you in an environment where motor function is an essential function of your job? Will medication come into play? And obviously the role then of compliance to medication in terms of improving your functional capacity then becomes critical. But I think I'm happy that I'm here so that then I get the lived experiences, so that then when I go back to the offices, then I almost report back to say, we are trying to integrate persons with epilepsy, but these are their own experiences. And I almost believe that over and above the safety issues, we're not talking so much of the cognitive issues and other related neurological secondary issues to epilepsy.
And so that wasn't a comment, that wasn't a question, it was a comment.
Sorry.
But I'm going to try to make a question out of it. So the first part of it is that the occupational related issues related to epilepsy and how do we actually reintegrate those people back into their occupations. Now, this is want to make a very important point. So if you're an adult and you've been working as an engineer, then you develop epilepsy with epilepsy subcomponents. 27 years old, you have your first seizure. Others were not identified. But then you still have cognitive impairment. Yet you're an engineer, you've been through university. Means your epilepsy is not adequate. because the behavioral changes, the cognitive changes, and those phenomena that we expect with epilepsy have not settled. Means the medication that we're using, or the dose, or the compliance, all those issues that you raise are not adequately managed, or they may be alcohol. So there's so many things that you brought about, but I can't say that that should be the reason why that person can't be reintegrated into their workspace. So I think we've got to look at the milieu from which a patient's coming from. However, you've got a patient who falls from a ladder 3 stories high, then develops epilepsy. You then get his epilepsy under control, but then he wants to go back to work because what he does is install solar. And then you say to him, you can't until your seizures are controlled. Even when you do, you have to do it from the ground. And he says, well, I can't do that because the office won't allow me to do that. That's a very different scenario. So I think you've got to look at each individual person, look at the scenario from which they come in, and then make decisions accordingly. I don't know that we can put a blanket statement that says cognitive function, motor function are all going to be affected after seizure. It should never be the case. It should never be the case. And as I mentioned, you get the benign types where the person doesn't have major issues. So then you get the malignant epilepsies where there is going to be cognitive impairment, there is going to be other behavioral changes. So those patients will never be able to get back into the workspace. So you're talking about patients that have been in the workspace and have to be reintegrated into that workspace. Don't forget the malignant who doesn't want to work anymore. Like most of our partners, they're all over 65. They should all be on pension. They should all insist on working, but malignant.
But I think the issue is suboptimal treatment, either from them not being compliant to treatment because they don't want to get that entire history to say you should not be having these conditions if you are compliant to treatment.
So then you should actually you should work closely with the neurologist in that particular setting. You can do drug levels, you can get an idea of them being alcohol because you can do blood screens for that. And so I think if you're going to work in isolation in the silo, then really you're not going to be able to integrate those people back into society. So you need to work with your treating physicians so that they can actually be reintegrated. And ideally, we should have everybody working. But unfortunately, the head of the fish is the starting place of the rod. And nobody wants to work in this country anymore. Everyone wants to be pension. One last question, because the postmaster said there were like
does epilepsy affect the life expectancy of the people with it? And the second one is, in layman's terms, what is the cause of drugs and alcohol on a person with epilepsy? What is the direct zero?
So I want to talk about 2 things now, because I haven't mentioned this. So we get SUDEP, which is a sudden unexplained death in patients with epilepsy. You see that in children? Got death is the cause of it. Then you get it in adults as well. It's not just a phenomenon that happens. And in adults, if you've got a focal epilepsy that starts in a particular segment of the brain, where our heart representation is at its maximum, we call that the cadunculus, you can actually stop your heart rate and that person can die from that. That peacefully when you sleep can happen in that particular setting. But if you're drinking and then you have a seizure and you fall into the road in the car bunch, I guess you can also have death. If you have certain types of malignant epilepsies, you will have increased risk of morbidity. So it depends again on the type of epilepsy. And most importantly, every patient that I see is adults who are not the primary generalized, they've got no tumors, they've got no head injury, etc. One of the first things we tell them is you're not allowed to carry your firearm. So obviously, if you have a seizure, you're not allowed to drive. Our law, according to the law in our country, you must go drive for 2 years. That's absolutely absurd in a country where we don't have public transport. But anyhow, it's a legal document that was stolen from the Brits from the 1940s, and it's never been done. We actually use the international kind of guideline. The Americans have the most similar system to ours, and so we say 3 to 6 months before you're allowed to start driving. So if you drive and you have a seizure, you won't actually have a death or whatever the case may be. And lastly, don't go swimming, don't have a bath. Seizures are from 3 to 6 months. Again, that can result in premature death. So again, as I said, all of this information has to be spoken about to every single patient, every single time. evolution. Otherwise, people do make mistakes and accidents resulting in premature death.
Thank you very much. Can we give a few rounds? Thank you so very much. Can we give you a round of applause? Thank you very much, Doctor. Whatever the doctor has said, I would have said it exactly the same. So as I said, during the day, during the evening, I will be sharing different points that we can all use to stamp out stigma. The first one that I shared was know your facts. The second one, be aware of your attitude. The third one, educate yourself. And the last one is, for now, is educate others. Whatever you get to know and to understand, have the courage, because it takes courage, to share with all the people around. Join a group, do your research on epilepsy, join the groups, speak to people, gather as much knowledge as possible, and do not be afraid to share that knowledge with the people around.